This is Anita from the Dusty Roads podcast. And if any of you have been listening, you know that one of the things that I love to do is sail. In fact, boating and sailing is one of my passions. I really love it. Even though I don't know if I'm really good at it, but it's something that I enjoy, and it's something that I enjoy learning about. So today I want to talk a little bit about a mile, like where a mile is not a mile, or how a mile is not the same as a nautical mile. And this is sort of interesting because if you're ever on a boat, or if you're traveling anywhere in a boat or going anywhere in a boat, they might talk about nautical mile versus a mile. And you might wonder, well, are they the same thing or not? Well, actually, they are not. This can confuse a lot of newcomers, but a regular mile and a nautical mile are not the same thing. A regular mile is known as a statute mile. It's a unit of distance used on land, and it measures basically 5,280 feet, or approximately 1.609 kilometers. On the other hand, a nautical mile is a measurement that's used specifically in marine and air navigation. The nautical mile is based on the Earth's circumference and equals 6,076.1 feet, or about 1.852 kilometers. So that means that a nautical mile is a little bit more than what we in the United States would know of as a real mile, or as a mile. So you might ask, well, why is the difference? So there is some math behind this nautical mile, which is kind of interesting. The Earth's circumference is approximately 40,075 kilometers. So you divide that by 360 degrees, which would be a full circle around the Earth, and that's about 100.32 kilometers per degree of latitude. So since each degree is divided into 60 minutes, 1 mile of latitude equals roughly 1.852 kilometers, which is precisely 1 nautical mile. So where, mile on land is based upon land itself. It's based upon you're going to go drive from point A to point B. You're going to go so many miles on land, or so many kilometers on land. Whereas a nautical mile is really based upon the circumference of the Earth, about the latitude. This consistency makes nautical miles a very reliable unit for navigational calculations. Because it aligns with the grid system of the latitude and longitude. So that's really why nautical miles are used when it comes to things as boating or air or other things, and not used for on-land travel. So the history of the nautical mile is quite interesting, that the concept started way back with the ancient Greeks. And it was Alexandria in the 3rd century BC. Was a scholar who significantly contributed to geography and mathematics. So basically it goes way back to the time before Christ even. And he attempted to measure the Earth's circumference. That led to this measuring of the Earth's circumference. So it started way back then about looking at longitude and latitude. Then a nautical mile over the centuries, seafaring and navigation, and, different people used to have, maybe different ways of doing it, but it became more sophisticated. So as Columbus started sailing around, as others started sailing around, this, being able to understand nautical miles, the maps, and all these other things became more sophisticated, and lead also to a lot of inconsistencies, because different people have different ways of measuring things, different countries have different ways too. So in 1929, there became an organization which began to set the international standards of nautical miles, which officially defined the nautical mile as exactly 1.852 kilometers. So, basically they said, look, a nautical mile is 1.82 kilometers, which is over 1 U.S. mile, and is, over 1 kilometer. So they began to standardize this. So nations began to now adopt this and began to say, look, we need to all have, all get on the same page here. We need to all be able to adopt this. But it didn't happen overnight. There were a lot of people that like the United States and United Kingdom, they had their own systems. They didn't want to, mess with different measurements. And so it wasn't until in 1954, the United States adopted this. And in 1970, the United Kingdom did. So really, even though they tried to standardize it in 1929, it took, almost 50 years for it to become standardized around the world. That, the United States and the United Kingdom were the last holdouts, and they didn't want to have to adhere to the system of nautical miles. So, this is important because if you're ever going to be out there boating or you're going to go any distance in boating, to be able to understand the difference between nautical miles, if you're going to travel by boat somewhere, if you're going to go on a cruise, you're going to travel yourself on a boat, it's important for you to understand this because, your captain might say to you, well, we're about 10 nautical miles offshore, which doesn't mean you're exactly 10 miles offshore. You're over 10 miles, out of offshore because of the fact that a nautical mile is longer than a regular mile. So, understanding the history of the nautical miles just gives insight. And we love talking about this stuff because we feel like if you're traveling or you decided you're going to travel around the world, you're going to go on a cruise ship or go travel some other way, that it's great for you to be able to understand this stuff so that you'll be able to know exactly what is being said when people talk about the nautical mile. If you decide to take up something as sailing, which we highly recommend that everyone does, that it's also important for you to be able to understand this because you'll want to be able to know, going a mile in sailing is not the same as a mile on land, and it's not the same as a kilometer. I realize that all these different measurements does get confusing, and it gets confusing for a lot of people. Even for me, myself, it gets very confusing. But the main thing to remember in all this, to come out in all of this, is that a nautical mile is over a U.S. mile, and it's over a kilometer. So it is 1.8 kilometers, and 1.6 kilometers is a U.S. mile. Sure would have been easy if the world would have all adopted the same system a long time ago. If they would have all said, look, you know what? We're going to all have, centimeters, meters. We're not going to have inches. We're not going to have feet. We're going to have, all kilometers. We're not going to have U.S. miles. We sure would have made life easier for a lot of people if we had all done that. I can tell you, 100% for me, it sure would have made my life easier when I work in design and having to convert from centimeters to inches and other things and, think in different type of measurements. It sure would have been easier if they have just said, we're going to make it all the same for everybody. This is Anita from Dusty Roads Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We sure enjoy you being part of our community. And, we're going to put in a link to our blog post, which is a mile versus a nautical mile differences explored. If you'd like to be able to learn more about this or get the exact measurements so that you understand this more, we will put this exactly into our podcast. We'll put in about the history so that you'll be able to understand all of these different things. Thank you so much for being part of our community. We sure do appreciate you.